Hey, what's up, everybody? This is a second set of notes we're going to do here today for the Chapter 10 notes on GUIs. So if we just do a quick review, on the first set of notes, we did lazy buttons and lazy buttons 2. That basically covered 5 of our 7 steps to create a GUI. So we did 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up through creating the widgets, right, to create the application. And then we also did 7 to kick off the main event loop for our GUI. The thing we didn't do was make our GUI interactive at all. So that's steps 5 and 6 here, where we're going to create some event handlers and then bind those event handlers to events that might happen in our GUI. So we'll talk about that here. All right, so the program we're going to write today is called Click Counter. This is kind of like a cookie clicker program. So you're going to click a button, and the button's going to change to reflect how many clicks it has had on it. All right, so go ahead and create a brand new file in your project here. Call it click counter. And then in the main, make sure you just import click counter. All right, so I did a little bit of setup here. I've got click counter program title. Purpose of this is to bind, again, to demonstrate binding an event handler, steps 5 and 6 of our procedure. We're going to import the tcounter module, same as we did last time. And then we are going to create a main function. Okay, so the first part of this will be review. And we are going to go through the steps just like we did last time. So we're going to create a root window to start from the TK module. So that was step 1. Window. Give it a title here. This one's called Click Counter. Roots.geometry to give our window some dimensions. We're going to have one button on this window, so it doesn't need to be real big. So we'll just go 200 by 200. Sounds good. All right. We need our step 2 for our process, which is to create a frame. And remember, in the Lazy Buttons 2 program, we didn't rely on tkinter's frame class. Instead, we defined our own version of the frame class, which we called application. So we're going to do that same thing here. Really, you can copy and paste a lot of this from the last set of notes. I think it's useful to retype it. So if you want to just retype it along with me, great. And remember, within this custom frame, this application, we're going to do most of the steps. Most of the things we do to set up our GUI is going to be done in here. So all of these things, including creating the widgets, creating the layout, or setting the layout manager, creating the event handlers, binding it to events, all of it's going to be done in here. And then the last step, step 7, is where we start the main loop. All right. Also recall that we do pass some information through to our class application here. The thing we end up passing is what we call the master. The master is the place we are putting our widget. So we're going to make an application widget, and we're going to place it onto our root window, because everything has to be placed onto the root. All right. Okay, so this is the entirety of the main. You can see we have steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 defined where those happen here. And we'll also talk about where they happen within our class application. So let's kick off and start writing that. our application is going to be based on tkinter's frame class. I'm going to do a doc string here. So this is a GUI application that counts button clicks. Write our constructor here. For reference to the object, be passing the master through. This amounts to step 2 right here, right? Because this is where we actually construct frame. Talked about how there's this special line of code that we're it's a bit beyond the scope of our class that we're going to include in our programs, and we need to include this such that the frame class gets the information it needs to set up properly. So basically, init, we're calling init inside of an init, right? We're calling the frame classes init, frame classes constructor. We're going to pass, again, what happens here is the master we pass into application. You can see it's right here. Reference to the root window, such that we're going to pass that root reference on to the frame classes constructor. So our whole frame gets set up the way we need it to be set up. Right. So once we have a frame, we need to grid it. We need to put it onto our window. So we're going to grid it. This is step 3, where the first time we're defining what is the layout we're going to the layout manager we're going to use. In layout manager. And also in the last set of notes, we used a method that we created called create widgets. We're only calling it that because that's what we're doing within this method. There's no special purpose to this name. It could be anything. But we're saying this is step 4. This is where actually make these widgets. All right. Looks pretty good so far. All right. Let's define that method. So create widgets, self. What's going to happen in here? We're going to create the clicking counter button. Remember, there's only going to be one button here. If you want to pause the video and try to do this on your own, feel free to do that. If you want to follow along, that works too. Okay, so we're going to create a button. We include the self dot here because this button belongs to the frame. It's like an attribute of the frame, you can think of it as. So we're going to use self dot as a way to reference the button for this particular object that is being created. All right, so, and then we're going to create the button. The master, the place we're putting the button, is this application we're creating. So self. All right, so put some text on our button. Text, say the number of clicks. So total clicks. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create an attribute that we can keep track of these button clicks. I'm going to call it BTTN clicks. It's going to be our attribute name. These button clicks, where would it make sense to keep track of these? Well, where we usually keep track of attributes up here, right? So before we even create the widgets, let's make sure that this variable exists. So we'll have self.button clicks initialized to 0. So the purpose of this is to keep track of button clicks. All right. Let's run this. Typo. Okay. Okay, pause the video, maybe see if you see what the problem is, or if you can predict what the problem is here. I didn't grid it, right? So we not only do we have to create the button, we have to actually place it onto our layout management system. There it is. Clicks. Doesn't work. Shoot. Just kidding. All right, so all good. Button shows up. All right, now we're on to steps 5 and 6. We need to make this button clickable such that when we click it, it changes the button count. All right, so here comes our next concept. All right, we're going to need to handle an event that happens in our GUI, and that event being the clicking of a button. All right, so new term here. We're going down below our other method. Is event handler. So this is going to be code runs when the button is clicked. Code that runs, well, I should probably generalize this, right? So code that runs when an event is generated. Parentheses, the button is clicked. What is an event? So I'm going to put this, let's actually put this, let's have this be before our button. The button is going to be what generates our event. Event is basically, at this point, we'll define this as user interaction with a GUI program. Example, a button click is user interaction. Okay, so when we click this button, what's going to happen? Well, what's going to happen is we're going to call a function. We're going to call a method. And when we call this method, we want something to happen, right? We want the count on the button to update. So we'll call this update count. This suits step 5. You'll note if you look back at our procedure, this is where you create event handlers. So it is to update the count clicks on the button. Okay, so what happens when you click a button? Well, we want to increment our counter. Click the button, goes up 1. And then we want our button's text to change. So remember last set of notes, I showed you that widgets have a configurability. We can reconfigure them. So our button, I guess I call this button 1. Right? Yeah, button 1. Configure our button 1 to get some new text. So the new text is going to say total clicks. Put our integer to a string and self dot button clicks. That's what happens when we click a button. Add 1 to the count, reconfigure the button to display the new count. All right. Now, if we run this yet, nowhere is this called yet, right? We haven't called this anywhere. So when this event happens, when the button is clicked, we need this to be called somehow. So how do we know when to call it? Well, luckily, these widgets come with an option that we can set, and it's called the command. So what we can do is after we create our button, even before we grid it, what we can do is we can configure our button. So we're going to configure again here. We set the command of our button, which basically means when this button is activated, when it's clicked, we're going to give it the code to reference. So when this button is clicked, self dot update count. Now, you might think you need parentheses here because we're calling a method, but we don't actually want this method to run at this point. Remember, oftentimes when we see the parentheses, it's like the method is running. So we're going to leave them off here. All right, and this is this is a hard thing to debug if you forget this. But you're actually going to leave the parentheses off the method call here. All right, so this constitutes step 6. I'm going to bind an event and an event handler. Right. I want to be even clearer about this. I've got something written here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this in as well. All right, so what we're doing here is we're binding an event, which is a button click in this case, to an event handler, right? A function we wrote. And we're doing that using this command. So the command is what does the tying together of the event and the event handler. All right. Let's run our code. All right. So let's see who can get to 100 first. Go. It's awesome. It's working. So at this point, you guys know how to create an event handler, right? And bind that event handler to an event. And you can do a lot now that you know that, right? Now a lot of this unit is going to be, well, let's learn some new widgets, let's learn some new functionality of GUIs, and implement this very basic type of a design to more complicated, more advanced GUIs. All right. So the next step for everybody is you're going to do a similar thing here, but rather than just changing the click count, the next one's called color changer, I believe. Yeah, color changer lab. What you're going to do in the color changer lab is now when a button's clicked, you're going to have the background of the button change color. So you have to figure out how to do that. And when it changes color, it's not going to randomly change color. There's going to be a sequence to the colors. So you're going to have to figure out a little algorithm to make sure that the colors cycle in a certain way. All right. So you can just use this program here as a starting off point for that lab.